And the first book that I remember reading was, of course, Goodnight Moon, because my grandfather would always read it to me, and that was special. So that's me. Do you want to go next, Lori?
Yes, I'm Lori Morrow, Superintendent in Lincoln County. First book I fell in love with was Cat in the Hat.
Yes.
I'm Ann Harrington in the College of Education, hey Denise, at NC State. And my first book was, my dad read to me over and over, Hop on Pop by Dr. Seuss.
I'm Dennis Davis. I'm an associate professor at NC State. I'm going to give two answers if that's okay. The first book I remember was this little nursery rhyme book that my grandmother gave me that my little kids now have, and they call it Daddy's Book. I think that's really cute. But the book that I remember reading and thinking, wow, like this is a real thing, was Where the Red Fern Grows.
I'm Cecily Lewis. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Joyner Elementary School. And this is my last, 20-some days to go. I'm retiring at the end of the...
oh, wow.
Wow. But I think my favorite book was Snowy Day.
I'm Marcia Kasanovich from NK, Educational Research and Practice. And first book I remember is Are You My Mother, Dr. Seuss.
Mm-hmm.
Love that book.
I'm Albert Smith. I'm the CEO of Metametrics. We're a research company down the street. I guess I'm impressed with the memory. Being the oldest person in here, I can't kind of rewind to first grade, second grade, but I remember in the 8th grade, I started this book, and it really just transformed me. It was The Robe. I forget the author, but it's the story of Pontius Pilate and the robe, and there was a movie made on it. And I remember my parents really remarking when I was reading that, because that Friday night there was a football game, and I said, I don't want to go to the game, I'm going to stay home and read the book. So
I love it.
was kind of a transformative moment that I remember. So
That's a big deal in the South.
yeah, that's true.
Okay. Do you want to introduce yourself too?
Sure. My name is Matthew Martinez. I'm with the Department of Public Instruction in the Exceptional Children area. And I'd say, I can't remember my first one, but my brother Sam is dead. Always that Revolutionary War.
My name is Chris Cox, and I'm the Executive Director of Read, Write, Spell, and also the President of the North Carolina chapter of the International Dyslexia Association. And the book, my first book that I remember really loving was Where the Wild Things Are.
So I'm Denise Morton, and I work at the Hill Center in Durham, but I am retired from the public schools. I was the Chief Academic Officer in Orange County Schools. My favorite book, which I've read over and over again, my 6th grade teacher read to us, was A Wrinkle in Time. And it's just one of my most favorite, and there's a movie about it now.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I'm Matt Stover. I'm the superintendent for Catawba County Schools. And I think probably the series I fell in love first with was The Hardy Boys. And then, but the one book that stands out is The Other Side of the Mountain. It's kind of a boy book. Enjoyed it quite a bit. So.
My name's Jeff Eisenhower. I'm the principal at Bunker Hill High School in Catawba County. And the book that stands out to me the most, that I've read numerous times, is The World According to Garp by John Irving. They made a movie about it, but the book is 1,000 times better, and I love the character of T.S. Garp in that book. So.
You have to say your name,
Where you're from, what you do.
Or the one when you were growing up, Eddie. Made you call me three.
Do we have people on the phone?
No.
Okay. No press in the room? It is live streaming?
Yeah.
All right, it is live streaming, and people can go back and listen to it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, then I won't talk about our announcement on Monday then.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe when we're not in a quorum.
Say, now you have to tell us.
When we're not in a quorum, we
pass
can talk about the announcement on Monday. Mark Johnson, State Superintendent, thank you all for being here. Many of you I know personally. Some of you I do not know personally yet, but your reputation precedes you, which is why you were on this commission. Did you already give the introduction to the commission, or can I give my introduction? Obviously, this is by statute. Really, this came from a place of the concerns of making progress in K-3, but then losing that progress 4 through 12. But realistically, it all starts with pre-K. So if we need to start with pre-K, we need to get the improvement up in K3, and we need to keep that going through K12. That is what this commission is about, and I thank you all. Some of you all came from very far away to be here. I thank you for volunteering your time and volunteering your efforts to be here. I'm really excited about this because this is really something where we can get you all together, really think about best practices and what is really going to move the needle so that we kind of get over these stubborn concerns and move away from incremental progress into general success for every student. That's really where we're trying to focus in on. And those recommendations we can bring back to the General Assembly. And yes, that can mean resources, professional development, funding. Let's figure out what we need to put into action. So very excited. Wish I could stay with you, but I can't. Favorite book that I read recently is, I'm not going to know the author, I should, but Leading Change. And it's the one, I think he's the Harvard Business School person, and it's the one with the penguins on the cover. I've read that before, and then I read it before I took office. And I would definitely recommend you read it. If you've heard me talk about my priorities, one of them is urgency. That is one of the top priorities listed in that book is urgency, and getting that sense of urgency among the people in the organization you want to change, and then building a good team and being able to monitor that. It's a great book, and I might have to go back and reread it.
John Cotter.
Thank you. That's it. Other questions?
No, that's just, yeah. What was your first book that you remember?
The Won't You Take a Ride in My Dump Truck?
I like that one.
I love it. It has a song that comes with it. No, we're live streaming. And I love it because I have a copy of it now for my daughter, and so she doesn't love it as much as I did. I wanted to be a dump truck driver. Actually, I guess my other favorite book is Goodnight Gorilla, because I have a little 5-year-old daughter, and read it to her all the time when she was 1 and 2, and it was more pictures. And then last year when she was 4, she I'll never forget the moment where she said, "I'm going to read this to you." And of course she had no idea what the words were, but she had memorized it, and I mean she was telling me every page, and absolutely loved it. And definitely one thing we need to talk about is, obviously if we had more pre-K we'd have less issues, but what are other things we can do besides pre-K? How are we going to engage? How do we engage parents? How does the state education agency get to parents before students get to kindergarten? And my daughter's going to be fine. She's 5. Someone has read to her at least 20 minutes a day every day of her life. She's going to be okay. She already knows letters and numbers. She's already excited about reading. We went and toured Lacey Elementary here. She's going to start there in August. She's so excited about starting. How do we help every family, regardless of their background or income or what kind of other challenges they face? How do we help them do that for their students before kindergarten? Because we know if we can crack that nut, what kind of exponential impact that's going to have for if every student's coming in for kindergarten ready. I mean, what that's going to be able to do for our teachers in schools. So really excited. Thank you all for making the trip here for this. I'm really excited to see what this commission comes up with. I'm gonna stay for a little bit, as I have time.
Okay, good. So we'll start the next piece is Dennis is going to kind of take a lead on the presentation side of it, and so he's also going to help us or ground us where we need to go today and then long term. I assume that everybody kind of read the background, but if not, we'll let Dennis take over from there.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me take over. I agreed that I would facilitate some of this conversation. I think taking over is a really strong word. You know this background as well as I do, but I do think it might be helpful just to, as a group, to go through this maybe line by line, idea by idea, to think about it and make sure I'm going to just start by kind of reading parts of this, and then if people want to jump in with questions or ideas that the superintendent or Erica can help us with, that would be really useful. And it's my understanding that Representative Blackwell had a lot to do with this legislation, so I think that's important to note. So our charge is to make recommendations related to these ideas. Best practices for public schools in the state to improve reading comprehension, understanding, and application for students in grades 4 through 12, to ensure that students complete high school with literacy skills necessary for career and college readiness. Anything to say or ask about for that part of our charge? That seems pretty clear, right? Okay. Number 2, methods to monitor student progress and provide appropriate and timely remediation to students to ensure success on nationally norm-referenced college admissions tests. Good? Thoughts, questions?
Reminds me of the pre-reading.
Yeah?
Let's hope everybody.
Did everyone do that pre-reading?
Yes.
Good. Number 3, the effectiveness, this one kind of speaks to me. The effectiveness of professional development in the area of literacy in developing the capacity of teachers in grades 4 through 12 for improving student performance in reading. Yes, good. Okay. And number 4, whether requiring professional development in the area of literacy for license. This is a much more specific charge, by the way, so this might be worth noting. Requiring professional development in the area of literacy for licensure renewal will be effective in improving student performance in reading, and if so, how such professional development should be structured and provided in order to maximize student outcomes. And then these recommendations will be reported by the superintendent to the legislature. I won't read all this out loud to you unless you would like me to, or if we need to read it into the record for some reason. Okay. And then we have these guiding principles down below. Our recommendations must include plans or specific activities to ensure teachers receive meaningful buy-in. That's important. And then also recommendations will not include supplemental assessments, but may include information on which assessments are most predictive to supplant current assessments. So that is, that's our charge. Anything to add or ask about? Okay.
I assume the predictive is predictive towards college and career readiness. What's the predictive that we're trying to predict?
In this instance, when you think of like predictive assessments, it's more so like, does this assessment align to meaningful indication of career and college readiness, or it could be end of grade assessment, or it's just, you know, does this test really tell us what we need to know? Is it important? Yeah. Good question.
Questions? I do think it's important for us to kind of have a shared understanding of what our work is. So this is a good time to clarify things. Okay, so we have an agenda on the back. We've already done welcome and introductions, and thank you, Erica, for the nice icebreaker. I love the emphasis on our own reading histories. I think that's important and a good way to get to know each other. And so now, are we ready to move to the presentation, or is there anything else, any other business we want to?
We're good. Yeah.
Is there 2 things?
Yeah.
One is internet connectivity, and 2 is power. Are either of them available? Got some notes and some.
Yes. Yes.
If that's okay, if not.
Literally right now?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct. Yes.
There should.
Look under by your feet, see if there's a power strip anywhere under there.
Let me, do you know,
And internet connectivity should be
The guest Wi-Fi
DPI
might.
guest.
does it?
You
Does it
can
not
plug in
pop
right
up
there.
as an access? Because if
It
not,
does, but what's the password to it?
oh goodness.
There was a sign on the door. I thought I saw.
Sorry, I mean to.
You're
Let
good, that's
me-
important. That's new.
So you found power.
Yep.
DPI guest password.
Everybody's legs. Probably not a good way to introduce myself.
I was just about to say, those are very good, important questions. What else do we need to be comfortable here to do our work? That's, yeah.
Pass this down.
Okay, so while we're getting
Hold on.
organized,
We'll pass it. We'll pass it down. We found the password.
I'll be back.
There you go.
so while we're getting all that organized, so Erica asked me if I would do a short presentation for our first meeting to kind of start some conversations. And I don't know if that's an honor or a curse. I don't know how I was supposed to respond to that. But I did say yes. And I deliberated a lot over what level to even enter when coming up with the presentation. So when I start talking, if I've entered at the wrong level, you can jump in and interrupt me at any time. That's partly what I'm saying here. But I decided that it might be helpful to think about what are some baseline kind of givens related to what we know about reading comprehension, and then some of the tensions in the field that we're going to have to grapple with if we're going to do this well in our state, and then some of the realities that we know that we're working kind of inside of a little bit. So I hope that what I share will prompt some good discussion. And I do appreciate pushback and kind of ideas bumping up against each other. So I don't want this to, so I've structured this as sort of a list of things that I think we know and that I think we need to deal with. But I want to be clear, this is my list of things I think I know. I think I say we in here, but I should say I. So I really, and I'm genuine when I say this, I want people to jump in, and I want this to be a starting point for how we can think about what we need to be doing to really support the readers in the state. And I've kind of focused this around the concept of reading comprehension, although maybe our charge is broader than that. But reading comprehension is a thing that I care about deeply. It's what I research, it's what I teach, it's what I know about. And I think that a lot of what we're asking our teachers to do in upper elementary, middle, and high school grades to prepare kids for college and career readiness is encapsulated in what we know in the field around what readers do when they comprehend text, right? So that's kind of why I've entered at this level. So I'm going to get started here. Again, please jump in. And I know you like to share ideas, so please jump in. Marcia,
Okay.
I'm calling out the people who I know really well because I know they'll jump in, and then the others of you, I hope you will too. And I know some people like to look at things in paper, so I did make handouts, so you can pass those that way and these this way. There we go. Okay, so as I said, I've structured this around three things. So here are some basic understandings. Well, that's baseline understanding, that's where I'll start. These are things we're pretty sure we know about how reading comprehension develops that we as a commission will have to think about if we're going to make recommendations related to these policies. Then some tensions that we need to grapple with and some realities that we can't ignore, even though they're messy and uncomfortable and it might seem inconvenient to have to wrestle with these things, we need to think about them. I'm hoping you'll indulge me first. Do we need more copies? Did they get stopped?
We need two more.
Let's see, there should have been 15. Where did they?
You might have minutes hanging.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We'll grab him when he gets back. You don't need them at first. I hope you'll indulge me in a quick exercise. And we already did an icebreaker, but we're going to do a slightly different one. So find a partner and be ready to talk to this partner. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a text. And this is the kind of text you might see in an upper elementary, maybe a middle school classroom. And I'm going to show it to you a little bit at a time. And at each stopping point, there they are. We're wondering where the copy is. At each stopping point in the text, I want us to do the following thing. With your partner, I want you to turn and answer two questions. First, what are you picturing in your head? In other words, what situation have you created in your head as a comprehender, right? Two, how did you get there? What did you have to do to come up with that representation of the text? Okay, so one is sort of a what is it question, and one is a more meta comprehension question. Okay, all right. And I'm going to stop at intentional stopping points to make this hopefully give us a way to talk about some of the big ideas that we're going to be having to wrestle with in this presentation and in our work. So here's the title. That's the first thing I'm going to show you, with the author's name. I won't make you stop and talk yet. Here we go. And I'll read this out loud. I think people love to be read too, so I'm going to read to you. If you want to read yourself, you can. The biologist was showing the distinguished visitor through the zoo and laboratory. Our budget, he said, is too limited to recreate all known extinct species. So we bring to life only the higher animals, the beautiful ones that were wantonly exterminated, trying, as it were, to make up for the brutality and stupidity. You might say that man struck God in the face every time he wiped out a branch of the animal kingdom. Okay, to your partner. What are you picturing? What do you know in your mind so far, and how'd you get there?
Okay. And they're like in this beautiful library here all around them. Drinking cocktails and no, they don't have the budget.
Maybe what it is.
So how'd you get there?
That was what I was thinking.
The first thing I do is I think about words that I do know.
So you guys one thing that features God himself.
That's a good point.
Maybe in your mind.
Now we're just mad at him for being so.
He does speak totally, but
I love it.
So I have to
say
know.
that like
I have to know what a biologist is, so I
don't know that. I don't know.
this man or woman in this some size.
So is he also saying
Second question was,
And then one visitor, so someone that's and just look piecing together actual words and then taking it to putting back.
the first thing I honed in on was the students or
The dialogue.
but also your photo. But if you did these photos,
And then it kind of goes in the parallel.
Yeah,
They have
mural, I
parallel.
got
then I
you,
don't
I got you.
And then it like this, so that
The ones in that
Before. Any words of
yeah, that's like wanting to exterminated. Like
Yeah, there's an issue
there's a
here.
story there.
Okay. All right, we're going to keep going.
Okay.
Here we go. Do you love the story? Are you really into it? Okay, good.
all coming
He
together.
paused, and they looked across the moats and the force fields. The quagga wheeled and galloped, delight and sun flashing off his flanks. The sea otter poked his humorous whiskers from the water. The gorilla peered from behind bamboo. Passenger pigeons strutted. A rhinoceros trotted like a dainty battleship. That's kind of a cool line. With gentle eyes, a giraffe looked at them, then resumed eating leaves. There's the dodo, not beautiful, very droll and very helpless. Come, I'll show you the recreation itself. Okay, same thing. What do you know? How'd you get there?
So now they're not in a
So what did this add?
stuffy library. They're actually
I don't know. To me, it has changed the setting.
And all of a sudden now you can just the scene has changed.
Yeah, I push button
Literal to completely quickly changed to me.
it's like he's trying to
Right,
create
and what
a
part of battlefield are thinking?
Right.
Zoo. It's a future.
The
And
figurative
also like
language.
description of beauty, and so a lot
It
more
really
imagery for
took
me.
it up a notch in the
So you can
second.
see how it
The
got.
I like forces. Forces is good.
And the sea otter
Where there might not be.
humorous whiskers
I think
from
just,
whiskers
I think just the setting to me is
yeah.
typical of zoo and laboratories, and so then it's just like I'm trying to pick, like I know what that is, and then this is not, it's just too big, it's too huge, it's
I'm
really
Then we pay, we value the teachers.
certain things like that, but
And then we give it
I don't think they're at
and at the end of the day.
So let's share out. We won't do this for every stopping point, and this is not much longer. By the way, this will take an hour. Can someone share out what are you talking about with your partner right now? What are you noticing? What are you thinking about? That's kind of useful for us as we're thinking about how we support comprehension.
Just that the background knowledge is imperative. And the figurative language is steep.
The connections you might make to other texts you've read.
Such as what kind of connections were y'all making?
We were talking about, if they were going through the zoo, potentially thinking about, in the first paragraph while they were describing, maybe are they gonna create a mural that might exhibit all of the zoo animal, what the wild kingdom looked like prior to man coming through and wiping them out?
Anybody else have, we had a cool conversation here about a real shift in our thinking between the first section and the second section. So initially it seemed like a more typical zoo, and then suddenly it's not. Maybe. Okay. In the great building, they passed between rows of tall and wide tanks. They could see clearly through the windows and the jelly within. Those are African elephant embryos, said the biologist. We plan to grow a large herd and then release them on the new government preserve. You positively radiate, said the distinguished visitor. You really love the animals, don't you? I love all life. I'm going to keep, just for time, I'm going to keep going. Tell me, said the visitor, where do you get the data for recreation? Mostly skeletons and skins from the ancient museums, excavated books and films that we succeeded in restoring and then translating. Ah, see those huge eggs? The chicks of the giant moa are growing within them. These, almost ready to be taken from the tank, are tiger cubs. They'll be dangerous when grown, but will be confined to the preserve. The visitor stopped before the last of the tanks. Just one, he said. What is it? Oops. Poor little thing, said the biologist, now sad. It will be so alone, but I shall give it all the love I have. Is it dangerous, said the visitor? Worse than elephants, tigers, and bears? I had to get special permission to grow this one, said the biologist. His voice quavered. The visitor stepped back sharply from the tank. He said, then it must be, but you wouldn't dare. Okay, what are you thinking, and how'd you get there?
I think it's more that sci-fi.
It's like Jurassic
Yeah,
Park.
yeah, right, yeah.
Your partner left here, but you can come talk to us.
It's okay.
Yeah, definitely. More on the recreation. The story, I think, is going to be more scientific.
I would see some kind of actually
Some
recreating animals that
yeah,
have come into
something.
What about the time?
Yeah, preserve or
the time period?
scientific lab.
But the question is, what is he gonna?
Right, now what's this big one?
What's
Yeah.
this big one? he's
Yeah.
actually thinking?
And then you've added all the dialogue. Like now you've gone from
Necessarily that far.
the fact
Well, that
that
is true, yeah.
I think the kids would see that this
you
is
know, like
something
all the background to then keeping up with the dialogue.
like,
Like,
I'm again thinking
it's
like,
a lot.
but definitely.
I don't know, but I was getting ready to Google it.
Yeah.
Google it, girl.
It's so each section really is so different.
Yeah, it's
and
gonna be
gives you
something we don't
background.
expect. Yeah.
So now,
Yeah, right.
just when you think you might have it figured out, I'm going to show you the last line. You may have predicted this, you may not have. The biologist nodded. Yes, it's a man. So now, if we were to turn and talk to our partners again, you would have a whole different viewpoint of what was happening, because now you're revisiting from the very beginning, and your view of what the biologist even looks like has shifted, right? Because the biologist isn't, or doesn't seem to be, a human, right? So we could spend hours thinking through this, but my point is that there's a lot of heavy lifting that we are asking teachers and children to do in classrooms when we talk about teaching reading comprehension in ways that will really support kids for what they need in the future. Even as adults, a text like this really challenges our thinking and forces us to build different theories and revise those theories as we move through the text. So I want us to keep all that in mind as we work through the rest of these ideas. So here are some things we are pretty sure we know about how reading comprehension works and how we get kids to have reading comprehension. And like I said, stop me at any point and we can talk about these in more detail, and also you can tell me that some of them are stupid if you don't agree. So first, we know that reading comprehension is a process, and it's made possible by a well-established set of skills and strategies that I have represented here. We could represent these differently, we could break them out differently, but I think the research consensus is fairly clear that for a kid to successfully comprehend a text, there's quite a bit of knowledge they're going to draw on. For example, their word recognition, automaticity, and fluency are very important, obviously. There's a lot of genre and knowledge about text structures and how texts work that they're going to draw on. I think that was illustrated pretty clearly in the conversations you were just having. A lot of what you mentioned, or that I heard you talking about, had to do with what kind of text you were reading. And as your understanding of the genre changed, that informed what you understood that the author was trying to tell you, right? Background knowledge of topic, and particularly for informational text, knowledge of the discipline to which that topic belongs is very important. Metacognition and strategy knowledge are important. And of course, language knowledge or vocabulary knowledge are important. And throughout the presentation, you're going to hear me talk about language. What I mean when I say language incorporates vocabulary, but it's not just sort of word meanings. It's also how words are built morphologically, and also kind of the syntactic and grammatical structures related to language. So I'm going to be saying language rather than just vocabulary to kind of reflect a broader view of how language works. So these are things that are pretty well established in the literature that we need to be helping kids develop if they're going to be effective comprehenders, right? Any pushback so far? Okay.
Maybe a question. So
A
where,
question.
where
I
am
told you Anna was going to jump
I
in.
was-
Thank you.
Where might reading interest and reading motivation come in?
It's a good. So I have other versions of this slide where I do add in more things, including motivation,
Okay.
which I certainly agree is very important. I just decided instead of oversaturating this with
Right.
every possible idea, I would get some of them. But
Fair
you're,
enough.
yeah, I completely agree because none of this is going to happen without some level of engagement.
I have a quick question. In colleges of ed, like in your typical teacher prep program, do teachers walk through this individually? So like this is a unit, I'm not teachers, students, so like candidates. Is this one unit, that's one unit, or do they kind of all learn it together? Or do you know that? Is that?
I think that's going to vary a lot.
It does.
Even me and so Ann teaches in our undergraduate program.
Yeah.
I teach a lot in our graduate program, and we probably do it differently.
Okay.
I mean, this is a personal answer. I do use this as an organizational structure for some courses where we're talking about comprehension,
Okay.
but I don't think that's necessarily the best way or the only way,
Okay.
or even a common way. Yeah.
That may depend on what their area of focus is too.
Yeah.
Elementary versus middle.
Yeah.
versus high school.
Yep.
Yeah.
But not
Yeah.
only does it vary from course to course within university, it varies, it's an
Mhm.
extremely from university to university.
Sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would agree.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so then we also know reading comprehension is really difficult to teach and assess. And this is partly my bias because I enjoy comprehension, but I think it may be one of the most difficult things to teach for a number of reasons, two of which I've laid out here. First, comprehension is what we refer to as an unconstrained domain, meaning that it continues to develop across the lifespan. It doesn't have a clear ceiling of mastery, and you can't make a clear checklist of all the parts of you can't break it into little pieces, right? So unlike constrained domains, for example, knowing all the letters of the alphabet, there's 26 of them, you can make a list of 26 of them, and you can determine whether or not someone has mastered that list. Comprehension is a much wider and messier domain, which makes it challenging to teach.
Dennis?
Yes.
Your first point,
Mhm.
amen. I think too often, I know our charge is 12th grade college and career readiness,
Mhm.
but I think we'd be wise to take a lifespan perspective. North Carolina is fairly unique among states in that we have a wonderful longitudinal database.
Mhm.
And instead of looking at cohorts and looking at how successive cohorts are doing, being able to track a student in motion over this
Mhm.
time. And we know, the closer the student gets to the 12th grade, it's like a balloon mortgage. There isn't much time to bend the curve. But earlier we can identify that, but then also recognizing that maybe we don't give them, but we can give them a path. It may take another year or two, maybe
Mhm.
community college, but that we should never give up on a student, is the
Mhm.
bottom line. And we should view it as a life learner.
That's a good point. What is our, Erica, process-wise, are we taking notes? How do we capture all these good ideas and make sure we don't lose them?
So the good news is that with the live streaming, it's always going to be available online. And then I'll send out it's very brief, but meeting notes later.
Okay.
Yes, I had a thought, but yeah.
So maybe it'll come, I'll keep going and then if it comes to you.
Yeah, keep going, sorry.
So the other thing that makes, and again, there are many things we could say here, but these are two that kind of stand out to me from the research. Another reason why comprehension is really difficult to teach and to assess, and assessment is a huge issue here that I want us to talk more about later. The process of comprehending a text is mostly invisible. So it is difficult to explicate or kind of make the invisible processes visible to others, which relates to this idea that it's really difficult to break comprehension into small teachable pieces that fit inside of kind of a typical lesson or curricular structure. So there's a lot of kind of, I call it messiness to comprehension that really make it not as amenable to our traditional views of teaching as other more constrained skills. Now, I'm not saying that comprehension can't be taught or that we can't do things to explicitly teach it, but I do think there are lots of challenges related to how we do that because of the nature of the construct itself. Another thing that makes comprehension really challenging to teach is that it is It's not really, although we assess it as if it were, it's not really a stable within-person trait that a reader carries from one text or situation to another. A reader's level of comprehension is variable depending on text, task, and context characteristics. And this is well documented in theories of comprehension and the way people talk about comprehension in the research literature. So one of the way it's often represented as kind of an intersection of at least three different sort of conglomerations of variables: text variables, which would relate to complexity, readability, etc., reader variables, which would include the skills and knowledge of the reader and motivation and other reader within reader characteristics, and then also contextual aspects related to the task they're actually asked to do. And in our field, people argue a lot about the relative size of these three bubbles. I represented them here equally, just to be fair, but we could argue that we're in a moment right now where we're very text-centric. So the text bubble is fairly big, the reader bubble is slightly smaller, and the context bubble is smaller than that. We could talk about how we should be thinking about that. That might be something we could tease apart at some point. But the general idea here is that we can't just think about comprehension as a feature of a reader. It really does vary a lot across text and topics.
Dennis, it may also be that with the, we talk about personalized education, we talk about personalized learning, we talk about millennials and their whole mantra, everything. And maybe that context bubble is larger than what we anticipate based on the individualization of people in our world today.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And some could easily argue that context is the biggest of all, way bigger than the other two in terms of determining comprehension success.
Because if you gave that passage earlier, some of the boys that are in my high school, they're going to be asleep on the desk. But if you gave them a passage on something from that they're passionate about and they want to learn more about, they're all over it.
And related to that, it might also depend on what they've been asked to do with that text, right? Maybe if they've been asked to do something that is compelling to them, they may dig a little deeper or not. Yeah.
And I think the other variable in this is the delivery system of that text. Are they reading it from a piece of paper? Are they reading it on a device? Are they reading it on a whiteboard? In the classroom, is it being read aloud to them? Because that speaks to how students are going to absorb it and understand it as well.
And maybe even, did they choose it? Was it chosen for them? Yeah.
Yeah, did I get to self-select out of one of these 5 pieces of text, or was this what my teacher told me we're reading today?
The other thing that I would think about is, how did the teacher prepare those children for that passage or whatever they were going to read? Because there had to be a lot of building behind the scenes before she even took them there. So, and what are those types of things? I think that's sort of what you're talking about, is what happens to get them ready to read that.
Another thing that we know is that, and this one is, I find this one very interesting and complex and just, we could do weeks and weeks and weeks on this. Comprehension instruction has tended to emphasize the teaching of strategies and or skills, depending on how you want to label these things, that can be applied generically to any text. However, language and notice I'm using language, not vocabulary. Language and content or world knowledge or background knowledge, whatever you want to call it, are also very important for comprehension success. And there are fears among people that the focus on strategies and skills has sort of supplanted opportunities for kids to use knowledge and build knowledge. Now I think that, I'll come back to this later as one of our big tensions that I think we have to grapple with. But our most prominent theoretical models of how comprehension works do affirm the knowledge-oriented nature of comprehension processes. So I think it's, at least again in my viewpoint, it's fairly well established that comprehension is a knowledge-based endeavor. One of the theoretical and empirical models that arguably has been most influential in policy and many curricula is the construction integration model. And basically, we don't have to get down in the weeds on this, but I just want to point out that this model really puts a strong focus on language and knowledge as the drivers of how comprehension works. So basically, readers start with the surface form, which is basically an accurate decoding of the linguistic structure of the text. and then they construct through a bottom-up, relatively automatic process of activating lots and lots of background knowledge, a mostly literal understanding of the text ideas. And then the final, so this is sort of a multi-layer view of thinking about what readers do with the text. And then they ultimately can integrate their knowledge that they already have with this text base, which already has a lot of their knowledge built into it already, to form a situation model. What you all were describing to each other and to us earlier when I asked you what you picture in your head about that text was a situation model. It's sort of a mental representation of the text that's coherent, meaning that it fits all the constraints of your knowledge and also the information provided in the text, right? So there's nothing left irreconcilable. It's all been made coherent in your situation model. And I think it's clear from this model that there is a huge emphasis in the comprehension process on readers knowing a lot of things, and also not only do readers know things that, not only does knowing things support comprehension, but reading comprehension as a process is very much intertwined with what we know from cognitive science about how learning actually works. So the CI model isn't just a model of comprehension, it's actually a model of how people learn new information. So in this sense, comprehending and learning are almost synonyms. And I find that to be, I mean, that some people will disagree with that point, but I think that to think of them as near synonyms, comprehending and learning, kind of helps us really understand what the heavy lifting that we're asking people to do when we're asking them to comprehend a text. So these are some quotes from David Pearson, who's one of our most prominent comprehension researchers. Basically, he's arguing that the whole point of the CI model isn't just to describe how we understand a text, but it's to describe how that information gets integrated into long-term memory and endures as knowledge. So comprehension is creating knowledge and using knowledge. And so basically, from this perspective, we could think of comprehension instruction as really being the development of three things: how to construct that text-based understanding like we were doing, how to integrate our knowledge with that text to come up with a situation model. Again, we did this with the King of the Beast text. And then the important part, someone mentioned application earlier, using what you know to engage in a range of critical thinking and application tasks around text. Again, this is another quote from Pearson. So I point this out here just to sort of clarify that when we're talking about comprehension, we're not just talking about kids understanding how to answer a question on a test. We're actually talking about application could be considered part of what it means to comprehend a text. So we can't ignore that broader application aspect and also the knowledge demands of comprehension. I just said a lot without being interrupted. That either means I've lost your interest or you're thinking of something to add. What do you want to add? Okay, I'll keep going. So just to clarify, my argument here is comprehension definitely has knowledge plays a strong role in comprehending. And also, the process of comprehension that our models kind of help us understand is largely an automatic process. However, readers can have some conscious control over their comprehension. For example, when you notice that you're not understanding something and you do something to repair a breakdown in understanding. So that's where metacognitive strategies can be helpful. So remember earlier when I pointed out that we've tended to emphasize strategies/skills perhaps too much to the detriment of emphasizing language and knowledge. I'm not suggesting that strategies are completely unuseful. There is actually probably more research support for strategies instruction than virtually anything else in educational practice. But strategies instruction have a place, sort of, they have an ancillary or a secondary role to language and knowledge in the comprehension process. Perhaps that's one way of thinking about it. Thoughts, questions about that? Okay, so research, so just to sum up this part about what we know, research tells us quite a lot about how kids develop comprehension. And there are a million things that I could have listed here. I tried to list the ones that I again, this is my interpretation of the research, where I find the evidence to be most compelling. So reading comprehension is supported by classroom discussion. It's supported by explicit strategies instruction, however, when done judiciously, as I think we've made clear. It's supported by kids having access to engaging, high-quality text with consistent structures and scaffolds in place to optimize their success and help them mitigate challenges they may have with those texts. And it's especially important as texts become really complex. It's supported by being integrated with writing and content area instruction, learning and using new words in multiple contexts, opportunities to build knowledge and new perspectives while reading multiple texts on the same topic. That seems to be a really powerful way to help kids bootstrap their knowledge and comprehension concurrently. Teachers using high quality formative assessment data is very important for comprehension development. And again, I think we could have some really good conversations about how we get good data in this area. And then finally, timely and responsive intervention supports are needed for supporting comprehension. So if I were to lay out sort of my evidence-based list of principles that we need to think about, this would be a lot of that list. However, there are a lot of tensions. Well, any thoughts, any things that we've completely left out? And just to be clear, I won't scroll back, but it all implied here is that kids have also had opportunities to develop all those skills that we had listed in the circle that are needed to make comprehension possible, but I didn't relist those here. Although we do know that for many kids as they get older, if they need help with those skills, that's going to happen during intervention support opportunities, and so those need to be very timely and responsive and sort of tailored at the right needs and the right levels. Arguments?
I just say the last bullet, the responsive intervention supports with the multi-tier systems of support work that's going on in the state. And I work in a lot of school districts. There's still a lot of confusion about what exactly they're supposed to be doing with them in that tier 2 and tier 3 area. And so I hope that's part of our work, is that we can make some recommendations, because teachers want to do the right thing. It's that sometimes they just don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing when they pull that group of kids out to work on a skill. So I think the more information we can provide, the better.
And I have tried to represent that as one of the tensions, so help me think about how we represented it here, because I completely agree, yeah. So, things we still need to grapple with. So I'm thinking of these as sort of unanswered questions, or things that where research doesn't point us in a clear direction, but we will have to take a direction, so we're gonna have to wrestle with how do we know what the best direction to take would be. And again, my list would be different from anybody else's list. It might be a good exercise for everyone to make their own list, actually, but we haven't done that.
Would you mind going back to that quick prior slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the content area piece there is in direct alignment with this article here.
It seems to be, in a lot of ways, yeah. And I'll be very transparent. I'm trying to make these recommendations in a more general evidence-based way rather than endorsing a particular idea or a particular way that this could be done.
Do you think that all these apply to all grade levels, and even like early literacy versus
I do.
secondary? Okay.
Yes.
I hear some yeses. Yeah.
Yes.
I think in putting these together, I was probably most directly imagining grades 4 through 8 because that's kind of my wheelhouse. But I think versions of these apply very, very broadly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because some of where you are talking about words or even some of the background knowledge for the lower grades, you could make it interchangeable with letters or sounds.
And another point that I didn't put here, but I thought about it, we do tend to, we have this phrase that people always say, we're reading to learn, learning to read and then reading to learn. I think we need to, that binary doesn't make sense. It served its purpose in one period of time, but young kids are always reading to learn, right? You're learning something from, you can and should be learning something from every text you read, even if you're a kindergartner and someone is reading that text to you for the purpose of helping you learn to read. So those two things are always happening. And when you're a 12th grader and you're reading something, you're still learning to read because you're learning how to read that text about that topic for whatever whatever purpose you're reading that text. So you're always reading to learn, and you're always learning to read. I don't know if that's helpful in thinking about how these apply across different.
I used that
levels.
phrase today, and I apologize for it.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to be the language police, but I think that it is a phrase that
I agree with you.
It doesn't
Yeah.
serve the purpose that we think it's serving. It's actually creating a division. I mean, I
Right.
think it's part of the reason why we think of K3 and then 4-8, right? We've created this sort of dividing line that is arbitrary in a lot of ways, and I think I do a lot of work with readers who are struggling, and I think that dividing line is a disservice to them because we sort of assume they should have reached a certain level. They haven't. What's wrong with them? Rather than thinking about what's wrong with the system that created that difficulty.
Well, I guess that's where the tension piece is, at least for me, is that there's a disconnect with the whole purpose of comprehension in many classrooms across the state. With why am I having, particularly when it comes to the assessment piece.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I reading about something that either doesn't matter to me, I don't care about, or all those, there's a whole list of words there. And there's a tension there.
Yeah, and I think the article does a good job of kind of pointing out some of the issues there. Absolutely, yep. Okay, so here I'll get to my tensions and let's add these to the pile. So one of the big things that we wrestle with as a field, and I think it's going to influence our work here, is what is the appropriate balance of complex grade level texts, which are called for in the standards, and the historical tendency to use leveled or matched text that children can read with high accuracy. If you work with teachers, you know that's a very big, it's a thorny question. A lot of the curricula that are doing a better job of connecting with knowledge building and content areas put a lot of complex text in kids' hands, which is a great thing, but then does that mean kids don't ever read text that they can read with more levels of independence? Or, I mean, I think it's a very big question, and everybody probably has a way of thinking about it.
Comments you made earlier, I think a lot of these times, we tend to bifurcate, and it's an either or, and it's an and.
Mhm.
That's right. I don't think some of these, it's all one or the other,
Yeah.
it's an and.
Yeah.
And the proper cocktail of that and is pretty
Yeah.
important, how much time in
Yeah.
each one, so.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I kind of tried to word the question of, what is the balance?
Yeah.
How do we, and how does the balance vary across different kinds of readers, different content areas, different grade levels? I mean, I think that cocktail probably has a lot of parts to it. But I think this is going to be one of the biggest things we're going to have to think through, or someone is going to have to think through, because as districts implement curriculum more like this, pointing to that article, I think that's one of the sticking points that teachers are trying to puzzle through, especially because there is only a certain amount of time. I mean, getting back to your and point, like time is an actual finite thing, and if the curriculum makes you spend X number of hours or minutes doing the complex text, where is the time for the and, even if you agree the and has to be there, right? And then, related to that, when we are using these more complex texts, how can we ensure that all students have success with them? So this gets to the point of how do we build teacher expertise and really scaffolding these interactions? And then how do we maintain opportunities for engaged, self-selected reading? Does that fall away? How do we maintain that as a part of what kids get to do and get to learn to do, which has a lot to do with engagement. We know that support for student autonomy is a strong predictor of engagement, which is a strong predictor of reading achievement. So I mean, these are not trivial things. These are real things that we have to figure out. Also, assessment. We've alluded to this many times. Reading, this is my argument, but I think there's a lot of basis for it, and other people have made this argument also. Reading assessments typically, and I'm thinking kind of EOG style passage comprehension tests, the ones that have a lot of political and accountability power behind them, typically measure part of, but not all, the competencies involved in skilled comprehension, right? And so teaching that overemphasizes or almost exclusively emphasizes those assessments is very likely to miss or misrepresent important standards. Notice I said standards, not things we think we want kids to learn. I'm saying standards, things that are enacted into legislation that kids are required to learn or have opportunities to learn in public education.
I would even add to that, it misrepresents reading.
I amen to that. I agree.
mean, just, you lay those passages down in front of kids, and some of them would rather die.
Yep.
And you're speaking to like summative, high stakes, not formative.
Well, I have a question later. I think yes, I am. I think a big question for any recommendations related to curricula would be like, what is the nature of formative assessment in that curriculum, and how do we know we're getting good formative data? But for this point, I am mostly speaking to more summative assessments.
And Dennis, on your first bullet, there's a tension between fixed form test and computer adaptive test. Most of our state assessments, the high stakes assessments, are grade based, and so when you get to the tells, I'm not getting a lot of items to see how far this student can go, but I'm also not really pulling down very deeply, kind of pitching at the middle. So, and they're not computer adaptive, so it's not optimized, and you only have so many minutes to test. So there's a real tension there on how precise we can measure an individual student with the number of items we're using, especially if it's a fixed form test.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of big questions and tensions here. I will go out on a limb and say, disagree with me, and even if it's a computer adaptive, I do agree there are better formats and better ways we could be assessing. But if you are, and this is getting to Lori's point, I think, anytime you're handing a kid a text that's disconnected from everything and asking them to read it and answer a question, you have misrepresented at least some portion of what comprehension actually is. Therefore, no matter how precise, no matter how reliably and validly you do that measurement, you still haven't exactly measured many of the important competencies of comprehension, right? I'm not saying what you have measured isn't useful, but it's a small piece of what comprehension actually is.
Also, the motivation of the student to take the test. I think you mentioned, one of you, on the motivation. I don't know if you saw, it was a fascinating study just recently. One of the 3 international assessments is PISA. And we came in about the same place we always came in, I think, among the OECD countries around the mid-30s. And this is a test that's given to our 17-year-olds. And the number 1 country, if you will, that quotes was Shanghai. And so these enterprising researchers tried an experiment where they took the Shanghai students who were number 1 and randomly assigned them to one of 2 conditions. One is take the test. The other is you take the test, but there's $25 and you get to keep $1 for every test item you get right. They did that same experiment with 17-year-old U.S. students. That is, you're in the condition where you just take the test. Dennis, you're in the one you get $1 for every item you get right. Thought experiment, did it make any difference? The Shanghai students, whether you paid them or not, didn't make a difference. They came in spot on the same amount. Guess what? You can say we're streetwise, you can say whatever. When we paid our kids, it's the 17-year-olds to take the test, we went from being number 32 in the world to being number 12. The test items didn't change, but they were motivated to try their best. And as you get up in that tier, up like it's like 12th grade, Nate's so problematic. Because a lot of those kids are just blowing it off when they get, 4th graders typically are not doing that, 5th graders, but as you get higher up, so motivation to do your best on a test is pretty important too.
Yeah, that is interesting. And another tension here, how can we monitor students' progress and intervene when readers struggle without saturating classrooms with too many assessment activities? And I think many of us would agree that we're doing there's too much of this, or not enough in the right way, not enough of the data being collected in the right ways, that giving us the information that we want. A lot of my work deals with the ways in which testing has kind of corrupted what counts as comprehension instruction. I often make the argument that part of the reason why we don't see effective strategies instruction happening is because strategies are mostly taught as sort of labels for test items, so it's just item teaching, not really strategies instruction. So I mean, I think there's a lot of big issues here that we could dig into related to how do we get good data, and how do we get good data without data becoming the only thing that we're doing and getting. And then this is getting to your, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Denise.
Denise, I should be able to remember that. It's practically my own.
Dentist.
Yeah. So
Your female counterpart.
I know. Every time I order a Starbucks, it is called out for Denise. So this is where I'm kind of getting at the point you were making, but maybe in a slightly different way. Tell me what you think. People are arguing that our tiered approach to intervention seems to work better for more constrained skills because it works well or better when you can have a clear criteria for mastery, and that criteria for mastery is actually meaningful for the concept that you're teaching, right? It's not arbitrary or artificial, which is more difficult in an unconstrained domain like vocabulary, which doesn't have an upper limit and doesn't have you can't have a list of words kids have to know, or you could have a sample of words, but it's hard to get a good sample. And the same thing is true for levels of comprehension, which developmentally are hard to pin down. So maybe we agree or don't agree, but I think that the tiered approach works better for more constrained skills, and also the way RTI is implemented in a lot of places tends to treat comprehension as if it is a constrained set of skills, even if it's not, right? So there are questions about how do we appropriately identify and intervene when children have difficulties with these more knowledge-oriented competencies like vocabulary and comprehension. So I think your question and my question go nicely together, I think, because we're sort of trying to interrogate, like, how do we really support kids who need that support, and how do we figure out within any particular approach or curriculum where and at what level of language to intervene. And then when we have determined that where intervention is needed is actually at the comprehension or knowledge-based level, I think the research is lighter in that area in terms of helping us find clear interventions at those levels. Thoughts? Is that a helpful addition to your question? Do you disagree?
That's what we feel every day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the frustrating thing, like, I'm a current student with her decoding and fluency is well beyond benchmark, but she does not comprehend a thing. Mm-hmm. And I can't get access to materials that over time are helping me serve her. And I'm doing everything I can think to do and documenting all of it, but there's nothing that someone can just say, here's something that will help. It's very frustrating.
How does she do when she self-selects?
There's no comprehension when nothing she's taking in, but she has unbelievable decoding. Her fluency is unbelievable. You would never know it, and she was passed from year to year in early grades because she can read. But when you're starting to now talk about what you're reading, write about what you're reading, the upper grade teachers immediately identified it. And
what do you think her receptive understanding of vocabulary is? Vocabulary is a big thing with me. So is she understanding what people are saying to her?
Yes.
Okay.
An application of text?
She's made some improvement on written application of ideas over the course of the year, but just still basic comprehension. And I do several things with her every day. I read to her and I'll just say, like, I'm going to read to you for 5 minutes. I want you to make a mental picture, and then I'll ask her, and she just turns red in the face. She's just listened to me for 3 to 4 minutes, reading a story that she would self-select, and she isn't able to talk to me about it. Something on her own. It's just not there.
So if that were coupled with self-selection and say something that she was doing, would you see a difference there? For example, if she was, I don't know, making baby dolls or doing like that, in other words, what I see in schools a lot is there's a lot of reading, but it's void of application. It's void of actually doing something with it, making, creating, solving a problem, doing those things.
Not in my setting. There would be, you would see a lot of that. You would see a lot of that on a daily basis.
I think the idea here is there are some big questions around what are intervention methods that could be useful for a variety of different kinds of students, especially when their difficulties seem to be really knowledge-based. When I say knowledge-based, I mean things that are like vocabulary and comprehension that are historically have been difficult to intervene with. Okay. these are these my last three tensions. I'm going to move a little faster here because I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but I think it's a good conversation and we're getting some good ideas out. So other questions that I think we have to wrestle with, if we were to adopt a more content-oriented or knowledge-oriented way of thinking about comprehension instruction, another big question that we would have to think about is whose knowledge or what knowledge do we choose to emphasize? This is a huge critique of knowledge-based curricula. There is a perception that they tend to highlight sort of a white middle class view of what knowledge is needed, right? And I think this is a really important question that we need to think about. Like, how would we pick topics that are culturally relevant and useful and interesting and engaging for all sorts of different learners? I think that is can't shy away from that challenge. I think it's too simple to say we know what the core knowledge should be, because we simply don't know what the core knowledge should be.
Dennis, are we a textbook adoption state?
I don't know about.
So
We used to be.
When there was
We don't have money for textbooks anymore.
Technically, I guess we still are.
I mean, where the districts are, that they have the flexibility to buy whatever textbook they want, or is it an approved list, textbook adoption?
We don't have money.
There's no money for us.
We've not bought textbooks in how long?
Teachers
Early
don't have
2000s,
Yeah.
late 2000s.
class size.
So is your question specifically about textbooks or what books kids will have in their hands?
Well, your attention there triggered my thinking.
Yeah.
Do we have standard, is every 8th grade, 7th grade social studies textbook the same, Guilford to Chapel Hill, or
I know.
the districts have the flexibility to choose their own textbooks?
That's right. The one we did use to write textbooks, we had a state adoption list. We had choices.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think some of the tensions around how would we choose these topics are similar tensions that are probably experienced when you adopt science and social studies standards or content area standards, right? Like, how do you know what knowledge is chosen? Reading standards have, in my experience, been thought of a little differently because they're more like content generic. But if we don't think of reading as being content generic, then I think we're entering into some big questions about, so then what is the content and how uniform should it be? Personally, I would say not. I wouldn't want to see it be very uniform, but I know that that's an opinion that might not be shared by everyone. Another issue I think we have to think about, and I think this has come up a couple times. So what we know about comprehension is based primarily on traditional offline reading of printed text. And what we're measuring is most relevant to traditional offline reading of printed text. Even when they're reading it on a screen, they're still reading a static text, right? So when we think about the demands placed on readers by internet reading, we may, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but we may see different and bigger gaps and different and bigger achievement needs when we think about where reading has moved in the last couple of decades. And I don't know if we've done a good enough job of thinking about that as a legitimate part of what reading instruction needs to include. And then this is a question that's really important to me as I think about working with teachers. We don't have a good sense of what teachers need to know about reading comprehension to effectively implement comprehension instruction, especially if we're thinking about having teachers do an approach that's radically different from what they've done in the past. And I think that knowledge for how to implement a specific curriculum is probably necessary for doing a curriculum well, but it's not sufficient to fully support effective adaptive practices that are responsive to all learners in the classroom. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of thinking about what would teachers have to understand about how comprehension works and how it develops and how to teach it to do something that's radically different. We could probably add a lot to that, but I'm going to keep going really quickly. Here's some quick realities. These are things that we can't ignore. There's nothing here that I'm going to say that is new to this room, but I just think it's important to just say it, have it in the record, so we've all heard it and thought about it, and then we can argue about it later. Reading comprehension achievement is not where we want it to be. I think that is sort of this commission wouldn't exist if that were not true. There are societal issues that affect educational achievement that do not happen within the walls of the school. For example, poverty, unequal access to resources, etc. So there are things that we can address in this work, and then there are things that have to be addressed more broadly and systemically. In all of our reform efforts, we need to remain committed to supporting a culturally and increasingly culturally and linguistically diverse student population in our state. I think that's something that we have to, think about really thoughtfully. There will be implementation challenges with any new policy approach or curricular reform. So I think the main idea of this slide is there are no easy recommendations that this commission could make that would sort of magically address the charges that we've been given, right? Like there's going to be a lot of difficult work here. No matter what recommendations we make, there will be challenges with implementation. Also, teachers and teacher development matter a lot. Good curricula and resources are very important, but there is nothing we could buy or adopt that would replace the need for high quality teaching. We must invest in teachers and teaching. And I think that just has to be said.
And letting the teachers teach.
And letting the teachers teach, yes. And I think this, Anne, help me out here. This is, teacher autonomy is a really important thing. When curricula are adopted, there has to be an understanding that investing in the teacher's use of that curriculum is the only way we're going to see any improvement through that curriculum, right? The thing in the box that you purchase is not the thing that's going to help kids get better.
In other words, it's not the program.
In other words, it's not the program, yeah. And
it's not the program, it's the teacher.
And like I said, I think this is all stuff that goes without saying, but I think it's important to have some shared understandings of where we stand on this.
Yes.
And I also think, embracing this idea of this is going to be a challenge. This is the problems we face are complex, and there can't be simple solutions for complex challenges. If the state were to try something radical and transformative to address reading, we're not likely to find the best approach for all readers on the first try. In fact, there's not likely an approach that is best for all readers. And so I think we need to be prepared to maybe implement several promising approaches systematically and think about how we can leverage the expertise in the state to examine the relative effectiveness of different ideas in various contexts and levels of readers. So I think if we want to do this work well, we need to really think about investing in not just choosing something and hoping it works, but choosing several somethings and thinking carefully about how do we examine and investigate what is working, where and for whom, and then use that to drive statewide policy and innovation. Like I said, these are my ideas. Everyone could have made their own list of realities, and there are actual evidence-based sources that support these ideas. You can see that too. But that's what I have.
Can I go back to attention real quick?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it all came to me while you're.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm not sure it stems around literacy, but it does stem around time. And so, whatever we're doing with literacy in the classroom, saying that we need to let the teachers teach, which I agree completely. We also need to have time for them to collaborate and look at their data. And we don't have time for that. How do we change? Until that happens, when do we expect the teachers to do that? I struggle with that.
Yeah.
So is that something we could look at? Is that above our
Station.
Well, Erica left the room, so we can do it every day. Yeah. No, I think I'll tell you when they do it. They do it after hours when they're not getting paid, right? Like they do it, and that's a huge structural issue. Yeah.
We're just talking about literacy right now. We haven't gotten into math, or obviously that's going to go across those four major subjects, but still, as far as that's concerned, and then also too the professional development to ensure that these teachers are being trained the correct way with the proper resources. Again, another time constraint, something I think that I'd like us to look at as well, to talk about, if nothing else.
If I could build on that, so here's an administrator who obviously knows what matters with teachers. So like your last tension, what do teachers need to know about reading comprehension? It's teachers and administrators. And so you may be a teacher who does know, but you're told don't teach social studies, science, or the arts because that won't help our reading test scores. Or you're told you have to use this certain reading program with a complex text for 2 or 3 hours a day, and that's it. And so, like, sometimes as a teacher, you're not able to know, not able to implement rather what you know, because perhaps you're told by well-intentioned people, you can't do this. So I don't know, can we broaden, it's not just teachers, but teachers and administrators perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's a, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is more of a mom perspective too, because my oldest son is a junior in high school and my youngest is in 2nd grade. So just the decade between them in school, I have watched with all of this testing, the love of reading go down the toilet. And I'm fearful that our high poverty kids, you know, we need to talk about the odds, not just beating the odds, but we're taking the love of reading out of it, then comprehension becomes like a non-issue, because it's being forced. My 2nd grader, when she was in 1st grade, she would come home and go to whatever book she could answer the response question to. Like, there was no love of a passion, whereas 10 years ago, before Dibbles and TRC, really the written comprehension piece, there was a love of knowledge and love of reading and a love of learning more and doing more. And so I want this for all of our kids in the state, because reading to learn, learning to read, it's imperative. But what we're doing to these children in the general ed classrooms, K-3, and the pressure we're putting on these teachers for those little snippets of time, like, it's detrimental to everybody involved. So I really hope we look strongly at the assessment piece and what we're doing, because we're trying to create little widgets, and they're all different, and everything about them is so different. And I think we're just totally shaving off the love of reading.
There's also just to teachers, there's some just so very obvious things that we could immediately do, but we feel like we can't.
Right.
And we're just going to get in trouble.
Yes, that's a really important point. Yeah.
For me,
Yeah.
the fact that I have all but, like, when we reach the fluent beyond the benchmark, why are we continuing to have to assess them at mid-year and end of year? And when I'm doing that, I have 32 kids in my classroom, and it takes days by myself.
Yes.
And why am I spending days when they have reached 5th grade benchmark in February?
Be done.
Like, let's work. Like, but it's we know so much that we can do, but we just feel like we're not allowed to do it.
Right.
You know, I'm leaving. I don't want to retire. I'm leaving because I would mandated EL next year, and I will not do it. And that is why I'm really happy to be a part of this, because I have a passion for reading. It has been my life, and that is where I put my foot down, and I won't go into that room next year. And,
What were you mandated? I'm sorry.
the EL reading program is a mandated program, and we were told, like, just 3rd grade teachers knew days before they started this year. 5th grade, we heard at the beginning of the year we'd be rolled in over 2 years, but I mean, this is just I've dedicated my life to this, and it's just those kinds of things, and we're pushing really amazing people out, and it's again just the thought process behind some of these things. Like, I'm very much content driven. I'm in a unit right now with westward expansion, and there's a lot that goes behind it, and there's just all of these things we're talking about have been well planned and thought through over years, and finding new things and tweaking them, and yet next year the first book is a book of a girl in Mexico, but we still have social studies standards. Well, I don't reach Louisiana Purchase until 3rd quarter, so how my kids are going to make how we haven't even gotten to this country yet, and to read this book 1st quarter because I'm mandated to do it. And I have to follow that plan, and I want to know there's some wonderful books. There's some great things in these programs, but when you talk to some really highly qualified teachers, and I think it's almost like if we could take this, and yes, we can use this and use that, but those are things that are very, very frustrating. The alignment is just not right, and I don't know who thinks that through.
It's like the assessments have been driving the alignment. And when we changed standards, we had the state standards, and we went to Common Core. Now we're going back to state standards, different state standards. But it's still, you know, I hear teachers say all the time, it's the test that is driving what they're doing.
Right.
Not that love, not their students' interest, not that personalization of, you know, I've got a group of kids that want to learn about this, or a group of kids that want to learn about this in a certain content area. And I think until we remove some of those assessment barriers, to me, that's a big piece of what we need to address here.
Right.
I think too, talking with children, there's a lot of ways we can assess students. And again, given I've moved to a lot of performance-based assessments over the past few years, and children are highly motivated, and I'll give them a choice. And I wish we would have the right people come in and observe that situation, because they are comprehending and they do know, and we can show them. And I think.
And they want to show you in those cases too.
Absolutely.
That, you know, that's more motivating for them.
yes,
That's
it
a more
is.
motivating assessment
Right.
for them, because they can be successful,
Right.
or they can be successful in pieces, and it doesn't feel like
Mhm.
there are gaps, like when
Right.
they look and find out I'm a level 2 or a level 3.
Right.
And the TRC dictates what reading level, and that doesn't speak the same language as their DIBEL score
Right.
for what their reading level versus their reading comprehension is. They don't speak the same language, and you shouldn't feel like you're in second grade, oh, I'm an H, or like, or you know, like, it's too much, and it's too much on the teachers.
And when they added the written response at such a low level for those children,
Yes.
that compounds the issues.
And you
they're
can't get out of
experiencing.
it. You can't get out of that, off that letter until you're stuck.
So Ann and I are over here whispering to each other. I think you brought up the written comprehension.
Yes.
I think that is definitely something maybe this commission could talk about or
Yes.
address in some way.
Please.
Because it is, there's some interesting things there. I think.
Is there, Dr. Davis, such a thing as written comprehension?
No. There is written response to
text,
demonstrate
yes.
comprehension, but it would
written
never be
comprehension
measured.
per se is not a construct.
Yeah, I think it's not a construct in the way it's being assessed, and it's confounding a lot of different things, right? So it's not giving you good data about their reading because it's confounded with their writing, and then those two things could be very different. And there are and then there are the labeling and identity issues related to how those levels are working. I mean, there's a lot there. Yeah.
And I think the point all of us have been making is we don't want the test, the tail to wag the dog. And often we've misplaced priority. And if we're only trying to improve test scores, we're not going to make lifelong learners. We're not going to do the things that were one of your first premises. And I just stumbled upon, again, you probably all read it once before, but it's a beautiful poem by Emily Dickinson. It talks about there's no frigate like a book. It takes us lands away, and it goes on 6 more stanzas. I can't remember them now, but the power of reading, if we can really ignite that passion in kids.
When Dennis read to us, like, they stopped reading. I mean, my 4th grader is not read to any longer because it's not in their balanced literacy wheel. The way it's interpreted, it's a matter of interpretation, right? But we all enjoyed it when you read to us, Dennis.
Thank you.
So,
But that's interesting, Cecily. The feedback about the alignment, like, you know, we and Janine Burris, who's also on the commission, she can't be here today, but she's been emailing me she's listening to the audio stream. Her favorite book was Charlotte's Web. So I just wanted to let y'all know so she could have a presence here. But she made a good comment about like making sure that, or not being afraid essentially of cross-curricular development. And so that's a goal, right? It'd be great if we could create a system where it is cross-curricular, but it's almost like doing the alignment is out of place. Not so much the content, but the timing.
Right.
That's something I personally have never thought of before, and that's really frustrating.
And so I fought for that, not knowing I wasn't going to be there, but I want to help them figure this out. And again, I'm an IB school, so they said, well, we can move things. And I said, well, what about other schools in Wake County? And they're like, they won't be able to move that. And I said, well, we're gonna move these things. But I think it's so important because if you're what you're talking about, I mean, the connection won't be made if you can't pre-teach and background knowledge at that appropriate time.
It's also a time issue too, right? One of the things that I hear about that particular curricular situation is it requires a lot of time.
Right.
So the literacy block is sucking up a lot of time. One way to solve that would be to kind of collapse social studies and reading
It's in there.
into a longer
Well,
block.
that's-
But it's not the same standards.
Right.
So then you can't
Right.
really
You can't
collapse
really
them because you
collapse.
still have to do
Right.
both if you're going
Yeah.
to cover both
Yeah.
standards in theory, right? But if the standards were aligned so that
Then-
the EL
Correct.
curriculum actually did map onto your history and science standards,
Which I've done,
then you could
And it's one
create
block.
large chunks of time and be more flexible.
and it works.
Yeah.
It works well.
Hmm.
That's a very
Thanks.
interesting point. That's a really great point. Erica, are there other people listening who had questions or thoughts? Because I want to make sure.
Yeah, Janine's the only one that has emailed me.
Okay.
But yeah, that's
They certainly could. That would be useful. to get
Sure.
ideas.
yeah. She said let them write about what they read.
Right.
So she's Did we go over this last two yet?
We did.
Okay.
It was really good.
Any other thoughts on this actual presentation, like questions? Thing?
Did it accomplish the goal of getting us thinking about some ideas and stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Thank
This
you.
is really great.
I appreciated the opportunity, and I really appreciated your ideas and additions.
I love any presentation that starts out with like an activity. You know, you just instead of just showing the presentation, you're getting us involved. So thanks for that. Very educator of you. So I thought we might take a quick break if you need to go to the restroom. But at some point we'll do. Can you be back here at like 2:35? Is that possible? That only gives you
8 minutes.
8 minutes. Yeah. If you're late, it's fine. And then we'll get started on the pre-reading discussion. Dennis, do you care to have this into that Google Docs, which might become public?
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure.
I measured every word carefully with.
Oh, good. Thank you. Awesome.
I measured every word carefully with that expectation.
Okay,
So,
good.
yeah, it's
Okay.
fine.
All right. We'll do that. Thanks. Hey. Okay. That's fine.
I did want to get your thumbs up, kind of interesting.
You already printed all yours out. I'm so proud.
We've been involved.
I'm old school, I have to do
Makes
everything
sense
hard
with
copy.
lots of people,
You know,
teachers, and
A lot of
it's
this article is based upon.
interesting. Someone should write a case study about
the
reveals
That's the
about
problem, with just taking 2 years a day now. This is, this is
curricular
an
reform
Mhm.
and difficulties and
fourth
challenges.
grade reading. Let's just focus on reading.
It's interesting.
This is 4th grade reading, and you know, they were the,
There's a lot to
2015
that
had this
curriculum
huge
to
spike.
like, and then a lot to not
2017
like,
just came out,
and
you know,
then
we also went
a
to
lot to
computer-based
not like
test.
about the way it's implemented.
John White's arguing that there's a device impact.
Yeah, I think one of the two biggest things I keep hearing from people
Snape
is
scores jump around.
it takes more time than
That's a good point. Like since 2009.
And what I put on here is
plotted
North
for,
Carolina NAEPS,
which
just
then has to eat something,
scores
Oh,
which
that's
tends to
helpful.
for
eat
2015,
any
2017.
kind
I'll
of
leave this with you.
self-selected
Here,
knowledge,
you
the
can
other
keep it. Let me
important
take
reading
can I take a
practice,
picture
right?
of it and so
Yeah.
just I'll have it? That way you can
It's
take it.
unfortunate because I guess in
So
theory
it's
that
North
stuff is
Carolina
built
NAEP.
into that
I didn't do
curriculum, but
math
there's no
since we're
time for
really
it.
talking about
And then
math.
the
Yeah, no,
content
that's
doesn't align with the content. It makes it difficult to problem solve how you're supposed to fit the time in there.
Oh, and also, in my office is research room apart, and we can host any time
Oh,
next
good,
year, so
thank
if that,
you.
if that's
The
helpful.
texts
Yeah.
are lovely,
Definitely.
We have all
I can
the
see they're, what
TVs
Take that,
and
yeah, I'll have to
the,
see it.
they're trying to
but
do.
thanks for letting me be on the commission.
Well, thank
Sorry I have to
you.
leave early.
No, I understand, but no, that's
Doesn't it
helpful.
seem like
I mean, you giving me
that's
your
the kind of
comments for the
thing-
pre-reading right now, that's really
That's
helpful.
the kind of thing a district or a state
And
can
I'll
build
send afterwards, like just
themselves
notes from what.
that would align with our
So you'll
content
still be
standards, right?
updated.
Like you can take the general idea of like we're gonna have text sets.
Yes.
We're gonna teach using these complex texts that focus on these 10 topics that we think are really important.
I'll send
Those
you
10
anything
topics
you need.
align with the
I'll take really
states.
good notes.
Okay.
Social studies
we were all
standards.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Up
I've
and then
heard the organization.
And
name.
so y'all working on that as well?
But yeah, I'll,
We're reported off through North Carolina.
We are. Yeah, we'll have our outreach event there again.
I'll let
They're
you know.
working on the details.
Yeah, I worked with, I was the one that helped Deborah sort of make the connection.
you're here for the right
So,
reasons, I believe that.
I'm glad to hear
You
that.
too, thank
That
you
was
for
a- that's a
dropping in. Are
perfect
you,
thing
you're
to
from,
and
I live in Chapel Hill, but
so yeah, that's still,
Fine.
still a drive though,
What a
so thank
wonderful.
you. Oh, here,
unique,
this is yours.
wonderful place.
It really is.
I know, right? I should probably figure out what you highlighted and underlined.
I mean, I know there's something, but
Yeah.
once they get,
And then it's all based on
Oh, yeah, great to meet you.
Good
Thank you.
presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I
Yes,
really appreciate
so
it.
there is a,
And that's like when he said, "So are we talking about college or fair ready?"
What do they do for
We are
math?
telling them in third grade.
Okay,
they're
wonderful.
College
What do
and
they do
fair
for
ready
math?
based on their end of
They're
grade
fantastic.
test.
But it's
So the general
the general
numbers
we don't have any
don't have any common sense.
and it's just
But does anybody like take a step back and say, does this make sense?
well, and I'll tell you, I'm sure we'll talk more about this.
Oh, okay.
and it's I know my school is
I'm in Chapel Hill, 2 and 3.
we're seeing the 32 kids and they were
And the co-students are so
and I have 2 sets of 32 of 64 children.
But yes,
that's wrong, everybody wants to see special.
we have reading interventions that work with kids for 5 minutes a day,
From a table every day, so.
5 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And all they do is, they do ciphers.
Oh, you,
Yeah.
oh, great, that's
Got
really
one,
Okay.
I'll see you the next time.
I
Yeah,
had
sounds good. Yeah,
the
nice to meet you.
assistant superintendent last week.
Nice to meet you, because I'm sorry I've got to run. It's nice
No,
to meet you.
and Beth Anderson said to tell you a lot.
Yeah, we're trying to get together, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, so, cause we work with Metametrics a lot.
Yeah,
with-
yeah.
So, anyway, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
Yeah.
guys. Okay, bye.
But that's why I was so excited.
Tell me, because we're trying to obviously put structured literacy in the hands of general ed teachers, because they need to have it, they're not getting it as a figure. And I had this assistant superintendent tell me last week, she said, of course, it's structured literacy.
Yeah, sure.
It's in the hands of general ed.
I just, but this is very
They would use that.
I was like, the same thing.
You know something.
Best practice village.
Best
practice. Like, I just don't even understand sometimes.
Oh, and
I guess I wish they just,
more special.
no, I just wish there
I
was
mean, this MTSS thing is
a
just
way
like
for
every.
us to have the more
Yes.
But it's strange,
collaboration.
like,
I did, I did a workshop for BTs this week.
Do we
Because
do
they
that?
just,
Take
they're
a
so
shoulder
cute.
to the
The
right?
ones we told you they're the ones I always go to, because you've got the best knowledge.
Right.
And we
I'm
met
curious,
this week, and
just, if the child
and
needs it,
I think from the moment that we get really excited, and then we
Oh
just,
my God.
what do we do?
Oh, she
What
got a
do we do?
Coke.
And
Where'd you
I'm like,
find that?
You go down to where the restrooms are, they're in between them, there's a vending machine.
Oh, that's right, I know she came back empty-handed. Anyway,
Yes, I will. Thank you. It was a
I'm
treat.
glad we met each other.
I'm gonna get my evaluation.
Yeah.
And I said, no, just do it.
Right.
And I think in the end,
So does EL, does it not charge you
And they go in and they do their.
Okay.
That could
Oh,
be
so it's
like
in the
one
au-
of the,
so it's
well,
not
could
part-
be. It could be. Well, it's good to see you again, yeah. We'll see each
We'll
other
see
again, okay.
But none of the protocols, the whole class protocols involved?
See, I just wanna say hello. I was gonna tell you, I watched you on LinkedIn where they're following along and it's the whole class, everyone's, I mean, you can call that.
And it's all like.
Same
it's
text,
the
same,
text
right,
and
right,
everybody
same
knows.
text. In the life of this, right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
2 to 4 days.
but
No, I
Some
would,
people
no, I-
might,
no, I
some
wouldn't
people
either.
might, I
just-
guess.
What I
yeah.
mean by that is,
it's difficult to sort of say,
Driving today.
well, my
See, you text me, Denise.
graduating in 2 weeks from college, and she's gonna be doing Teach for America in Chicago.
Yeah, wow.
And I'm very excited, and but in her,
and then they'll bring you
finding
work
her
from the other
school,
side.
she'd say, and she said,
Drives me crazy.
just be
I don't have a solution.
asking questions about, do they follow
I
this
just feel like we stop.
curriculum, and if they're which they're likely to be a turnaround school and all this. And she figured out, I think she's gonna be okay, but she was asking a lot about just my autonomy in my room, and she'll be teaching reading, so we'll see.
Yeah.
I feel like I'll be in Chicago, so I'm figuring that,
Yeah.
figure this out.
Don't be just, because you know how
It's not their offside.
Right,
you know,
right,
to do what's right for children,
Right.
so don't lose faith, right?
no, absolutely
Okay,
not,
okay.
no more than anything, it just got me charged up,
Okay,
I just,
that's good, that's
absolutely
good.
not, oh no, and, that's what no, the reverse, I'm
Okay,
very
wonderful.
excited
Good.
about kids reading,
Good,
and,
good.
fifth and sixth,
Who's replacing you?
I don't know,
Huh, is there an opening?
I'm good, thank you.
You're good?
Yep.
I don't think so,
Okay.
but I will let you know, there's,
Okay.
there's,
We have lots of great graduates.
Well, I also,
That's fine.
I'm also married to a fifth grade
People
teacher.
know
Oh, there's that too.
yeah,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
What school?
I'm not going to say
Similar?
because I'm not
Okay.
officially. I'm not officially shopping for a job. I'm just asking, just in case. Just in case. Yeah.
I love fifth grade.
Yeah, I do too. It's my favorite grade to
They're
teach. Was our
incredible.
favorite
They're
grade.
just so great.
Oh, awesome.
Do you remember student,
Water?
Carolyn,
Thank
Yeah. Thank you.
gosh, what was her maiden name? Carolyn Moore? She's,
What year is she?
oh, she's gone, I was her mentor teacher, and she's from state. She was amazing.
This is my 5th year at state, but
Oh,
she was
yeah,
before that.
yes.
Okay, yeah,
So no.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Before my time then, I
She
guess,
was amazing, and she's actually in England now, and.
Oh, wow.
But we were able to hire her after she was away for a year, and then an opportunity came to work together, and it was the best, just absolutely the best. She was fantastic. It's great. It's really neat.
Okay. It's 1 minute late, or sorry, I apologize for arriving a little late. If y'all want some water, there's some in the basket. I figured we could spend the next hour with the goal of getting out early, just discussing the pre-reading. The big question I have for y'all, we've already talked about it a little bit. So we tied a little bit of Dr. Davis's presentation to the pre-reading. My biggest question, and this is usually the best way for me to learn, is to know what in either of these articles made you mad.
I have one.
Let's start off that way. Like, was there anything that you were like, that's not true, I don't like that idea, that stresses me out? What made you mad in either of these articles? I know that's really strange, but I can give you an example, and this is something Malbert just mentioned before he left. If you look at the one about Louisiana, the mixed news from Nape, figure 1, he made a really good point that those graphs right now do not have the latest Nape outcomes. So it's missing 2017. And so if you look at 2017 reading, it dropped. And so his suggestion is it's not as useful to look at it every 2 years, but more so maybe every 5 years or 6 years, since they do it 2 years, 6 years or more. So knowing that, I'm wondering if we should really get as excited about what's happening in Louisiana as the outcomes say that we should. Thoughts? Were you excited about what's happening in Louisiana? I don't know.
I had a question. I had an answer to your question about what made you mad.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
But I think it's sort of related to this question.
Yeah.
So I'll try to connect the dots. On page 13, second column at the top, where it mentions a poster on the wall that says "Keep calm and score basic or above." To me, this is one of my pet peeves is when schools kind of romanticize testing and turn it into sort of a sport or motivation. Like if you're picture, I'm thinking about kids walking through the door. They walk in, they don't see a poster about reading is awesome. They don't see a poster that says we read to learn. They see a poster that says we're doing this so we can pass a test. And I think that sends the wrong message. And I don't think that sort of test-oriented culture is going to produce the gains that they're claiming that they will see, because I think it, at best, will prepare them to answer test questions, but it probably won't even do that, because we know from research that you don't actually get better at testing by practicing and talking about testing.
There's one of my former colleagues. He had this very thick Southern accent, and he would always say, "You don't hang on. How did he say it? You don't make a pig lose weight by weighing it every day."
That's right.
That's
a good one.
Yeah.
I like that one. I probably butchered it, but yeah, it was. I mean, that's a really good point. So then that's the question of what assessments are out there, and we talked earlier a little bit about assessments. What do you envision a world where assessments are used in a way that's helpful for student outcomes and doesn't really become this testing culture? Like, what does that look like on a very broad level?
Well, I think on a broad level, that, well, I think of it this way. Okay, so when I look at those students that are with me every day, what is, I'm not going to use the word Johnny because I've heard Johnny used about.
Johnny.
What's Thomas going to do 20 years from now? And are we actually preparing Thomas to be successful through the path of life that he takes? And so, I'm not sure that the assessment piece that we have. No, I'm gonna back up. I know for sure that the assessment piece we have in North Carolina is sometimes very disconnected to the entire economic future of the state. And so, from that standpoint, I think we need to not only do work on this commission with the literacy piece, but also make sure that we're aligning it to what we want to see happen in the state over the next 30 or 40 years from an assessment standpoint. And some of the stuff that we're putting in front of students has no merit.
Is it possible to...
It's pretty direct, I'm sorry. So.
No, I love the honesty. This is good. Is it possible to assess where kids are in a way that they don't know they're being assessed?
Teachers do that every
Yes.
time.
Every
They're observing
day.
them
Every
when
day.
they're watching
That's
them
right.
do some kind of performance
Yeah.
task, a paper pencil task. You
Yeah.
don't have to use the word test
Right.
or assessment.
That's right.
You know, good teachers are capturing that every
All the
single
time.
day, every minute of the
That's
day.
right.
What about when looking at reading skills? Does that still hold true?
Well, I also think you have to go this level with that. The student that's going to go to the 4-year college or university there has a different direction, different path, different skill set that they need than the person that is going to go over here and do this or this or this. So we've set up a one-size-fits-all model, and we are losing kids left and right because of the amount of pressure or lack of success that they experience because it is not in their wheelhouse. It's not their life path. It's not their niche. And we see that happen all the way down into the elementary school level.
Cecily, what you were saying earlier. Yeah. So how do you change that?
Well, I think you were asking about assessments. If we were able to have some kind of interim assessment that allowed a teacher options to assess, whether it was observations, whether it was performance, whether it was paper pencil, you took that data and then teachers really did change their instruction based on what those kids needed. Kids were fluidly grouped or working in pairs. And then at the end of the year, I think you would see more proficiency.
Yes.
You would see more student interest.
Yes.
They're not being hammered over the head with an EOG or an EOC. And I think teachers would feel better because they would actually see the fruits of their labor as these kids are learning and they're growing. But unfortunately, the current structure that we have doesn't allow us to do that. And the current accountability model doesn't allow us to do that.
Dr. Moore, I have to share this story. I just shared it with Dr. Stover. My son is a very high-level reader. He is. One of the top readers in his grade level. He's excellent. He did not want to go to PE this week. His teacher emailed his mother and myself about some anxiety. We're a month away from a little less than a month away from the EOG. He is already stressing. The anxiety levels are continuing to go through the roof. So, which is a detriment to his education because of the amount of pressure. Now, this is a 3rd grader. And so, he is in the pre-EOG. He already tested. He was a couple points away from being a 5 at that point in time. So, we don't have to worry about summer's program, but that's a real situation that is happening in homes across the state every day.
That's a real child who now has some school anxiety because of those assessments and not wanting to go to PE where that's fun. You get to get out some energy. I mean, it breaks my heart for him.
I'm not worried about him because you're his dad.
Well, I'm not either, but I will tell you this.
But I get what you're saying.
But the test doesn't
right.
matter, and sometimes we wonder why parents across the state become disgruntled with public schools. It's because of those situations like that.
And because of posters like the one in Louisiana where that's the culture. It's, yeah, I get what you're saying there. Yeah. So one of the things that the commission, you guys are tasked with doing is recommending methods to monitor student progress and provide appropriate and timely remediation to students to ensure success on nationally norm reference college admissions test. That latter part, that's very wordy. We can leave that latter part off for now. Is that something that y'all want to focus on the next meeting? It is the discussion of the methods to monitor student progress and provide appropriate and timely remediation to students. Or is that something you feel like we're not there yet on?
In comprehension or across reading?
This one is cross reading.
Across reading.
Because we talk about, I hear us talk about it a lot, but I don't know if that's something that you feel comfortable doing yet.
Narrow the scope.
Yeah, for sure. Or would you rather kind of narrow down some recommendations next time on the reading comprehension, understanding, application piece of it, which is what we're discussing today, so that would make sense. But I also hear y'all talk a lot about assessments.
They're definitely interrelated.
They are.
Mm-hmm. I think on a practical sense, this commission will be successful when a teacher is armed with some recommendations on ways to meet those kids whose needs aren't being met currently. So maybe it is the comprehension situation, or not comprehension, the application of knowledge. Are they able to know where to go and get some text that's relevant to that student? And then once they're there, do they feel empowered to assess that student without over-testing? It's a very specific situation, but I'm presenting that as a way to make you think that's the ultimate goal, even though we aren't going to be measuring that.
I think teachers, back to the whole sense of urgency, they want something today to help tomorrow to form my group next week. I mean, I think that, of course, assessment is huge, but just monitoring and figuring out how to help them from day to day. So it just really, I think it would be important to, I know they would want their hands on things that they can do and how they can evaluate that to help the kids.
So teachers already do have assessments they have to be giving. We've been talking about the TRC, et cetera. So how would our recommendations, thinking about urgency, what could we do or recommend that would not just add or complicate?
There's with the tier 1, 2, 3, we don't even sometimes know where to go.
Okay.
I mean, I think that was all so new and just trying to meet these needs. And I think that just having an avenue that we can access this information.
Can you talk a little bit more about the tiers and then how you were trained on the tiers or the system itself?
There's very little training on that. I mean, you'll sit with the PLT and you'll have you'll sit with your team and maybe have a PowerPoint and you'll read some things. And you will have we meet weekly to talk about interventions, but we're working with intervention coaches that also don't have the answers. I mean, the coaches themselves don't necessarily have the materials or the answers to this.
And I feel like tied to that, if we could strengthen core classroom instruction, we wouldn't need to have as many interventions, right? So if our core classroom instruction were strong and, we wouldn't have to spend as much time, or hope that's the intention, on these interventions, right? Yeah.
I feel like it's the principal agent problem where you've got people at the top with really great ideas and then teachers at the bottom that know, with the students. I'm sorry, that was, teachers are not on the bottom, let's be real. Okay, sorry, I just said that out loud and that sounded poor. But teachers at the student level and then people at the top in DPI. And so there's so many players and layers between the two. and somewhere teachers feel like their voice is not being heard. So from the bottom up, and then to top down, these great ideas are not being filtered into the classrooms. And so I guess we got to figure out like where that breakdown is.
But it should be all of us together, right? Like, it shouldn't be top, bottom. It should be all of us together and about children. I mean, it's,
Agreed.
right? How do we break that down? So
But I think
I don't have the answer to that.
just asking.
My philosophy is just put information out there, and those
Right.
people will find the information. Teachers are very resourceful, as you know, and they will figure it out and go all the way up if
The
they
teachers
haven't
can,
been.
but then teachers, administrators, everyone. It's
Yeah.
the whole culture. It's the whole community. It's
true.
not just the teacher.
Intervention specialists, yeah,
Like,
agree.
everybody. It's all of us.
And there are barriers that prevent teachers
Right.
from actually exercising their
Right.
ability to use resources even when they have them.
But, I mean, this year, I mean, just going back to this, I had, 2 kids with, I needed intervention plans, 1 behavior, 1 reading this year. And so on my own, I'm like doing the research on my own because there has been no training. We have not had any kind of information given to us. So I'm doing this at home for each child, and then, so I feel like I'm going there trying to figure out my own plan. And based on what
That's not fair to you at all.
well, that's what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, so you try to figure it out, and so I think that would be a good place to start, just having some formal training with how to create an intervention plan.
Right.
And there's
You're
just
in Wake County,
small-
correct?
Right, but there's
So
just
if
small.
she's experiencing it here in your backyard, then I can imagine that the smaller districts further out in the state might have had even less training. Yeah, I would think that you would be, just based on where you're located, that you would have the best training, the most coaching, the best access, because you're right here in Raleigh, or right here in Wake County. So I think that speaks volumes as well.
I think we've been kind of building the airplane as we're flying it.
Right.
Yeah. So nice
Do
way
you
to say
feel-
it.
Mark
Yeah.
can speak to that probably, but I think we're just trying to, because we're 3 hours west of here.
Right.
But our districts have been trying to make the most sense of it ourselves.
Right.
And then work with teachers on what this looks like, but it has been a very difficult process.
But do you feel
of
the
which
sa-
we don't have any solutions for.
Right, but are you sort of sitting where we're sitting, like, we don't have a real program or a real,
There's not an instructional framework.
No,
Right,
that's
You can
correct.
right.
hang everything under and off of.
right,
And connect everything to. And to your point, teachers don't have training, administrators don't know what the expectations are. We at the district don't have enough money to give them the
Right.
resources and the materials that they want and the time and the training. So I think until we start with a real concrete framework
right.
and then make sure everybody understands that framework, is trained in that framework, assessments are linked to that framework, resources are linked to
Right.
that. I mean, I don't know, that's just sort
And
of,
then the problem gets only better because once people start to realize, oh, we've got to have this, then we're off to the next thing.
right.
Right.
So,
Yeah, once
Right.
you get a little proficient, time to do something else.
and that's a typical,
Yes.
That's sort of the
That's how
cycle
big-
we
that's how
lived
big
in.
systems work, yeah.
right.
So I am just asking this. I'm not necessarily endorsing this idea for the record. So it sounds like part of what they're doing in Louisiana to address some of these big issues is they're using curriculum as the thing, like the linchpin, right? So like adopting specific like forms of curriculum that then kind of give you a starting point for knowing what you assess, how you intervene. So they're like, rather than having different policies and procedures that are disjointed, right? So is that where, is that a good idea? Is that where this conversation is going? I mean, there's a lot, again, I'm asking, I'm not saying that's the right way. But if you're thinking about what's the coherent thing that then all the other moving pieces kind of stick to, intervention, assessments, everything.
I mean, we do have a statewide comprehensive reading plan. I mean, we have that. Maybe it's interpreted differently,
Yeah.
but we have that as a working framework, right?
But it sounds like it doesn't have the right, or it doesn't have clear
Maybe that's the next
resources.
step for us, is that we look at that plan and we sort of
Attached to
peel
it.
back some of the layers and
Or
figure
does it?
out.
There,
Hey,
It's pretty comprehensive.
What's not.
and
Yeah,
it's
it is
coveted by other states.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
but I think it hasn't, not every teacher in this, I mean, not every teacher in the state has had the training. It's 5 days. I
And
mean,
it's interpreted differently, right?
Right.
The way one county or one principal or one teacher, you know, so there's differences.
but I mean, it
which
is, I mean, it is a very nice, well put together, thorough training. It's just providing that training and having the teachers take, I mean, it's 5 days.
See, that's my question is like, we have this great framework or plan, but if teachers aren't feeling it, is it the fault of the plan, or is it the communication of the plan? But like, is that the problem?
The translation of it.
Translation
of it.
interpretation,
Yeah.
resources that
Yes.
should go with it.
Yes, yeah.
And the size. I
And the
think,
size.
I think the enormity.
Size, the scope, yeah.
Right.
Right.
You mentioned curriculum. I heard Heidi Hayes Jacobs speak one time in a conference in California, and she said that, you know, if we really taught the curriculum as it was laid out, most kids would go to grade 22 and a half. So, you know, the curriculum is just massive. It's titanic in nature. The comprehensive reading plan that you mentioned is just megalithic.
It's
And so we're trying to, you know, I guess the thing is, like Dr. Moore said, is pare down. You know, what is the essential aspect of reading? What is the essential curriculum? Everything can't be important. If it is, then nothing's important. So,
But do you think that what's important to a district in the eastern part of the state would be as important to a district in the western?
I think what has to be important, again, has to be connected to technology, to the economy, to the future workforce of the state. We cannot get away from just teaching things for the sake of teaching things. There has to be an outcome. It has to be outcome driven.
Richard.
And I think we're at such a global place now. I don't think we can exclusively localize it. I mean, yeah, we're all charged with preparing kids for life after high school, but that looks different for every kid. They may stay in our community, may not stay in our community, and we need to prep them so they can go work in Timbuktu or stay home and work for their parents in their family AutoCAD business, you know, whatever business. I mean, I think that whole globalization is a big part of it. And that's a mindset shift for a lot of people.
Well, but there has to be some sort of a core. For example, you know, when I think about the social studies curriculum and how massive the social studies curriculum is, and I was a social studies teacher, so I mean, I'm going to tell you that not every general that died on every battlefield is important. So, you know, from a core standpoint, what are the nuts and bolts that we want a very educated person, you know, what is the stream of consciousness within that curriculum? I think that same thing exists with lots of things, because knowledge and information changes over time. The ability to read it, comprehend it, and apply it, you know, is where the strength lies in it. But it also has to be relevant at that particular time to whatever you're dealing with.
So would you say in reading that there are principles of instruction that would apply to everyone? So for example, all students in grades 4 through 12 need to be exposed to complex texts on a regular basis, and then the way they're translated may vary, but like there are some big ideas that you would say would hold true across, or what would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, for example, the application of the Constitution, you know, would be an example of that. So,
big idea.
Yes, a big idea around a big document. That's a big document. So, you know, I could simply take, as a civics teacher, the Constitution of the United States and a few other primary source documents there that are important to American history and government, and make that entire course. I don't need a textbook, so to speak, to do that.
Right.
So do you, I mean, in terms of what Louisiana did, where they kind of essentially put out like a Yelp of sorts of, here are the curriculum you can use, and here's the quality. Does that make you uncomfortable knowing that some might choose the low quality ones? Or do you feel like if North Carolina ever did that, you would want to only choose one with certain, the certain principles that you're talking about? Does that make sense?
I cringe at that because we know from research there is not one program that meets the needs of all students, and that's just common sense. So even if you say, here are your 4 choices, even within that, like, it's not the program, it's the teacher. And so it's not about choosing a curriculum, or it's about the principles perhaps of instruction that all teachers need to follow. So like if we could look at the curriculum and say, okay, across these, what are the big ideas? What are the big principles that we want to be able to implement?
Yeah.
I'd be good with that. But to say, here are your 4 curriculum packages, choose one, I would feel very uncomfortable with that, because I know from evidence and just from common sense, that's not the way we want to go.
And I think that takes the teacher's autonomy away.
Absolutely,
too.
which we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and it also
Absolutely.
it discounts student interest.
Yes, it does, which we were also talking about.
You know?
Yeah.
It discounts current events.
Yes.
Any relevance
All those
at
things
all.
that are happening.
Marcia, you had, sorry.
I agree that not one curriculum is a silver bullet, but I also think curriculum matters.
It does.
And it's important.
It does.
And just as we mentioned at the beginning of this, not all teachers have that knowledge and that ability to teach really well. So having something in place to help support that, I think is good. But then that professional development to help teachers learn how to use that curriculum well and differentiate instruction. So I think this can help with the alignment issues, and it can help those teachers that may not have the ability to do the things that you do in your classroom. We probably all did when we taught, to help get them started. But that professional learning, professional development has to be there so that they have a basis from what, and they're not creating their own. Because I've been in a lot of classrooms where teachers are creating their own. They're spending nights, weekends, developing all their own materials. They don't need to do that.
That's not the answer.
It can be there for them, but then they use their knowledge, their experience, their professional learning that they gain to differentiate instruction.
Yeah. And that goes to the third point of what you guys are charged with is looking at the professional development out there. Is it that we need to make sure any PD offer does just that? Or creates more teachers that make curriculum less relevant? Right, that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The choice of curriculum, less critical, yeah.
Yeah, the dream would be to create all the teachers that it didn't matter.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
But they do still need books. Kids do need things to read and do.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
It depends on what we're calling curriculum.
That's right. How do you define curriculum?
Yeah, that's true.
That's
And
right.
then resources.
They do
Right.
Resources. Resources is a huge,
Yeah.
is a huge issue, as equally as big an issue, I think, as the professional development.
Great point.
And clarity. Make sure that we've got clarity, because we have educators across the state that there's still a lot of folks that are unclear as to what is supposed to be done from year to year. But again, the curriculum, the standards are they are massive. So,
And you know, Common Core, say what you will about it, it was supposed to take us from those massive set of standards to a more narrow, focused set of standards that would allow teachers to go deeper and deeper, opposed to teaching so wide and broad. And for whatever reason, that didn't work out.
Is that because it's been hard to change that behavior, or no? Like I don't.
It's testing.
I've heard that. Now, is that it?
Testing. It's testing.
In like summative, formative, or all of it?
formative testing goes on every single day in classrooms.
That's right.
Okay. It's what you do with the testing piece that matters here. So the summative piece becomes a judgmental piece now with effectiveness and
your report card grade.
That's right. That's right.
right. And so, you know, again, I take it back to the third grader that lives in the Eisenhower house. He's concerned he's going to have to repeat the third grade. Where he got that, I don't know. But that is a reality, you know. And then you've got And we need some sort of measurement. There needs to be a metric somewhere. But, you know, it can't be the whip and the chains for everything that goes on. Because it's not an accurate measure of how well the success that students do.
It's an autopsy measure. By the time you get that data back, your kids are gone, and it's too late to, you know, they're dead in the water in that 3rd grade. He'll be going on to 4th grade next year. So by the time those EOG scores come back, you're not going to change instruction.
But that's what we do in this state. I mean, it's the definition of insanity. We just do the same thing over and over and expect different results. Because we do take that test in May, and if you do not pass as a 3rd grader, guess what? You take it, 5 or 7 days? I mean, it's insane. Like, okay, so maybe you were the percentage that had it was off the first day and you passed the end of grade. Ridiculous and stressful at the end of the year. And then if you don't pass again, you go to summer school, which at the end of the day is only 12 days because it's 3 4-day weeks. We're going to do it again. And then if you don't pass, you go to transitional 3rd, 4th grade. Okay, what? Like, somebody tell me how any of that makes sense to an 8 or 9-year-old and to these families. And there's so much.
The other piece is it's cruel and unusual punishment to sit children down for 3 or 4 hours to take an assessment that's got 55 or 56 questions, whatever it is on those tests, and expect to get a valid measure out of it when their attention span is all but maybe 10 minutes at the most. So according to research.
Yeah.
So the formative piece is valuable. And that's where a master teacher gets really good data and can assist kids to help them to continue to progress throughout.
This year, we've started the check-ins, and they have been incredibly helpful to me. And I can't see it or read it before, prior to the kids taking the test, and it's on the computer. And I have no idea how long it would take, but the kids finish relatively quickly, in 30, 40 minutes. And they don't seem too stressed about it. I've given 3. So we go in, we go out, and this is the first time, unlike the EOG, I get data immediately. And it will come to me, and what I show the kids, I show them my data, and I'll say, I'm really only going to focus, I can see how many kids will miss a certain question. If there's so many that are missing it, then I said, that's what I'm focusing on. So last week, we did poorly on informational text. And I can go in right then and there and look at that and then talk to the kids about that. And I'm feeling more empowered about that. So I have the data immediately. I think it's the kids cannot sit there, or they're just doing this. They'll get that paper EOG, and they're just looking to see, like, what is my day like? And they truly, a lot of them will admit to you they're not reading it. But this has been helpful. So the reading check-ins have been great. They're short, they're quick, immediate data, and you can
change your instruction. That's
the next day. But it's
which
also
is powerful.
And it's so powerful for the kid. You can show the children their own information, and we've never received anything like this. So they get their own report, and it is very detailed. And the kids at our level, we have them reflect on their own data, and they actually like that too. But with the EOG, they're gone, and I can't see what how they've scored. I don't know where we were successful and where we weren't.
Can you tell us more about the check-ins since they're new?
The check-ins there are 4. We have like 4 passages. They're grade level. Ours are on the computer. They'll assess whether just certain standards, and they are to be aligned with a quarterly instruction. The kids are not really complaining about them. I like it. It's
good,
and it does help me.
Good.
And we are not expected to take them, but we've opted to take them every quarter, just so that we can check in.
Yeah.
This is the 2nd year they've had the check-ins, and they phased them in, and the original intent was to use them as that short snippet.
Right.
Help teachers measure where kids are, change that instruction, and move it. There was some conversation in the very beginning, in the inception of the check-ins, about would it be possible that you could put all 3 of those together and come out with an EOG score. But unfortunately, the way the accountability model is set up, that can't fly, but it would make sense.
That would be perfect. I mean, that would be very helpful.
Cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Running
keep it-
record.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's what the word predictive, under the guiding principles, the word predictive essentially means which, and I don't, maybe it's not assessments, maybe it is check-ins, or maybe it is like checks for understanding which we'll just use assessments. Which assessments are the ones that are most aligned to the EOG, so that when kids take it, they're not stressing out. They know where they already are. Or, I mean, unfortunately, they'll still have to, they'll have to take it, but like, what is an assessment that is most predictive to where they won't be so stressed out? What is so predictive that they know before they take the EOG or whatever the literacy exam in third grade is, like, what is most predictive so that when they take it, they already know they're going to fourth grade. Does that make sense?
Well, your
So
son
that's what
should
we mean
know,
by
right?
predictive.
He scored almost a 5 on the beginning of grade, but he's still so stressed out, right? And that's
Right. But even, I wonder if he's taking a check-in, because even the check-in, there's no stress. I mean, I don't call it an assessment. I mean, they're very relaxed. I'm like, okay. And we're in and out.
But that could be a
But it just
feature of the culture of
depends.
your school. I could imagine it
Right.
being treated just
yes,
like
in
any
some
other
schools.
test.
It's different. And I mean, I'm for Forsyth County, and so I'm in 35 schools, and it is, the testing culture is different in every single building. The testing culture from administration to down, it's just different. So it depends on where you are.
But I would say, clearly across the state with the EOG, the behaviors are so completely different. I mean,
Yes.
it's like lockdown. So, I mean, the kids definitely pick that up. I mean, the physical space has
Shut
to
down your
change.
school to administer those
Right.
tests, because there's so many kids with separate settings
Right.
and.
So think about the money that's being spent. I mean, we talk about there's so many limited resources, there's not enough money, there's cuts here and cuts there. The amount of money that's tied up into the EOGs.
Well, what you're talking about goes along with a framework, like Laura said, there's got to be a framework. There's got to be some clearly identified things that are going to be measured. There has to be a timeline. There has to be common pacing with that. There has to be a clear pacing guide that goes along with that to make sure that folks are on track to do certain things. So,
how do you pace reading instruction? That's, to me, is.
well, but that goes back to the curriculum piece, though. That goes
Right.
back to
And the standards.
and the standards.
But even then, like, okay, I learned how to make an inference in first quarter, then I'm reading a different text second quarter, I still have to make it, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes instruction, like, to me, reading, you can't pace it out and script it out like you can, like, content. So, like, I can say in social studies, we're studying the Constitution here, and we're studying the American Revolution here, and so forth. But in reading, the skills and strategies and the standards are so recursive, like you do it all year long. It's just hard to me to conceptualize it. I mean, I get what you're saying, but it's hard, right, to think about. Like,
But that's what
comprehension.
teachers are expected
No,
to do.
I know. Oh, I know they are. But reading, if we think about like reading comprehension, like
But-
our presentation today.
But again, that's the one-size-fits-all mindset
You're right.
that you're talking
You're
about
right.
there.
You're right.
So what we're talking about is tracking a kid's progress to show that they are making progress.
Right.
And that takes in a whole other group of variables into play.
Right.
You know, the child that comes from my home or anybody's home in here is going to most likely read at a higher level than the student that comes out of poverty. You know, where there are no books in print in that home at all.
Another huge issue.
Right. So, you know, we've not even touched on the pre-K piece here today. So, and that's where we get more leverage and more talk about the superintendent uses the term move the needle. You know, early education of children is where you're going to get more leverage than any other thing that you do. So,
Are there things being done now in grades, or even pre-K through 3, that could be replicated in higher grades? But it's not because we don't have put enough attention on it. So, for example, like remediation, being strategic about teacher placement, like stuff like that. Are those things being done now in the earlier grades?
When you get to middle school, it's all content driven. There's no, I mean, you can have intervention and replace instead of an elective, but you're still going to go to your language arts class and you're going to be doing 6th grade language arts or 7th grade. Even if you were a 1 on your end of grade, you know?
And most of that starts really in about grade 4.
Yes.
You know, when you're really starting to get heavy content driven at that time.
Right.
That early literacy piece could be gold in the state, but you know, funding's been cut in a lot of those areas. I mean, you know, we're struggling with some of those things from a priority standpoint, but you know.
But you know, you were talking about all the money that's spent on the testing. I bet it would be interesting to know how much money really is spent on EOGs and EOCs, and then if you could calculate that and transform that into pre-K programs, would that equal that Matt would get 4 pre-K programs in his district, I would get 5 or 2, or you know, that would, to me, I think would be really interesting if you could sort of translate, because no matter what we decide or what we come up with, if we don't address it when they first come into school or preschool, it's not going to matter.
And that needs to include the test prep that goes with it, because our county buys practice testing booklets for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're low performing school, high performing school, it does not matter. Everybody gets it. So for my children, they would come home and the books had like 2 worksheets filled out for their test prep filled out. Like, that costs money.
And it doesn't work.
Thank you. Thank you. And they're not liking to read anymore, so please.
I imagine any recommendations you make will not involve those workbooks.
Well, at one time I heard the figure that for every $1 invested in early childhood education, the state would see a $17 return on that investment. So, and that goes all the way through those students graduating high school, being prepared for the world of work. So, you know, if you think about it from a legislative priority, putting more money into pre-K education for 3-year-olds, not for 4, but 3-year-olds. And if you talk to folks across the state, I had a conversation this week with my dental hygienist about how much it actually cost her for daycare for her child. This is a works 2 jobs. You know, the money that would be invested in that up front certainly has great dividends on the backside of things for the workforce. I mean, we have folks that just simply cannot afford childcare for lots of reasons, and you know, it's a pay now or pay later type situation.
Expensive. I should know this, but what percentage of eligible students in North Carolina attend a pre-K program? I can find out, but I'll find out. That's a good point. I should know that.
Think about how attractive that would be for our state from a public image standpoint as well.
From a business perspective,
Absolutely.
perspective.
For the
You could
economy.
relocate your
Those dollars now go out of childcare and whatever else it is. Yeah, we would love to have more pre-K.
Okay. I can tell you the answer to that in a second. All right, so in terms of next steps for the next meeting, I hear that what would be helpful is to discuss a framework, and these are all big words, so I'm going to need you to help me narrow it down so I can ensure people are expecting the same thing. But a framework that includes resources like pacing guides, etc., for schools to use to improve reading comprehension, understanding, application, etc.
North Carolina reading plan is 93 pages long.
Ugh, that's some pre-reading right there.
But we should all take a
We
look
can
at
read
this.
it, yeah.
We
And
should all know
it's broken
yeah.
down by what DPI will do,
Right.
what your district
That's
will
great.
do,
Okay.
what administrators will do, and what teachers will do.
That's a great idea.
And
There's
is
a
there-
resource part, a literacy part, a reference part.
Yes.
Is there a reason that somebody from DPI who is on that task force isn't a part of this?
No.
I mean, I just
we can
would
pull 'em
think
in.
that would be helpful.
What is that?
It's called the Comprehensive Reading Plan for the state of North Carolina.
And is there anybody, like, I mean, obviously we have superintendents, principals, teachers. Is there anybody else, like, at a district level that would be that you suggest to pull in as well? So not just somebody at DPI, but somebody at a school district level. Like I said, bottom up, top down. Like, at some point that's getting lost, and it'll be good to know, like, from each perspective.
Elementary directors, your assistant superintendent of curriculum.
I mean, if y'all feel like you can cover it, that's great.
I'd like to hear from some more teachers.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from some more teachers too, and I'd like to hear from like high school teachers to kindergarten teachers.
Yeah.
You're right in the middle, which is great, and just sort of see where we could get that whole vertical definition.
And teachers who work with all children, so teachers of students who are English learners, teachers of students who
EC.
right, we want to go across more diversity.
Okay. In terms of anything else, so I feel like with the pre-reading, this piece we discussed earlier, the one about Louisiana, do we want to continue referencing this, or do we just want to, like, yep, so you don't want to, okay. I didn't know if you'd be interested in anything that was in that article or not, but that I agree that that's a good conversation starter. Okay. And then finally, the next meeting, I will also send out another doodle poll for like I did this past time. Off the top of your head, what are some days, like consistent days that are terrible? So like, when are your board meetings? When, that I'm just curious to know so I can make sure there's some days we don't select.
When is the work of this commission?
So the report has to be submitted, by January 15th? Yeah, so we have several months. I mean, it would be great to have it before then because you don't want teachers to wait, but that's the very last date, January 15th.
I don't recommend Friday afternoons.
Okay, good to know.
For those of us across the state, we,
It's gonna be hard getting
It will be hard.
Spend your weekend in Raleigh.
I love Raleigh.
Oh, and I'm gonna try for the next one for it to be virtual, just because I wanted this one to be in person because it's good for y'all to see each other. But yeah, a virtual one is good for folks that have to travel. Okay, so no Fridays. What else?
Tuesdays, I have board meetings. You meet when? Monday?
Mondays.
So,
Okay. Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, Mondays aren't good.
Anything else? All right. What's helpful for y'all to prepare for the next meeting? I'm gonna send out the reading plan. Make sure we all read that in advance. I'm gonna invite some folks at DPI and then other teachers. And if you have any recommendations on teachers, let me know. Like anybody that you think would be good to add to this conversation. In terms of outcomes, are we clear on what the outcome of the commission would be, or do we need to revisit that? Do we need to structure each meeting so that it only has one outcome? Does that make sense? So if you look at the 4 charges, do you want the next meeting just to be one of the 4? Or do you feel like it's a conversation that needs to be comprehensive?
they sort of seem like they're interconnected.
Okay, good. That's great. Okay, anything else?
It would be nice though maybe to have a timeline to say this piece, and this piece. Based on the size and the priority there. If there is something that takes priority that perhaps the state superintendent wants to take back first, that would be nice to know as well.
Okay. All right, anything else? Okay, I'm gonna try. But hang on just a second, I have a